The rain hadn't started yet, but the city already looked washed out. Cars lined the glass towers like obedient metal soldiers waiting for orders. Inside one of them sat Daniel Reed, 52 hands resting steady on the wheel of a black sedan marked with the company's insignia, Cole & Partners. In the back seat, Evelyn Cole, the youngest CEO in the firm's history, was speaking into her earpiece, her tone a clipped whisper of control. "If the deal fails, I'll find someone who can think faster," she said. "And tell accounting to remove unnecessary staff allocations. We're trimming fat before the merger, not after." Her reflection in the window met his for a second. Then she turned away. The car stopped at the private entrance of the tower. Daniel opened the door and stepped aside. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, only adjusted her coat and strode past security. The guard nodded to her, smiled, then looked at Daniel as if he were part of the car. Inside the lobby, people moved quickly polished shoes, whispering over marble. He followed behind, silent, carrying the umbrella she'd refused. Every corridor was bright, every voice confident, and yet none of them saw him. The man who once led international negotiations, now reduced to a shadow, trailing behind meetings he used to host. When Evelyn stopped to check her phone, Daniel caught fragments of her assistant's panic. "They can't find an interpreter for the summit tomorrow," the assistant said. "The Tokyo and Seoul teams arrive tonight." "Then tell legal to improvise," Evelyn replied. "We don't delay because of language problems." Daniel said nothing. His eyes flicked toward the glass walls where he could see the storm clouds gathering. A group of executives approached. Evelyn's voice shifted instantly, warm, commanding, almost charming. She laughed at their jokes, exchanged air kisses, shook hands. When they entered the elevator together, the last man turned to Daniel and said under his breath, "You'll want to use the service lift, my friend, executives only." The doors slid shut before Daniel could answer. His reflection stayed trapped in the mirrored surface, crisp suit, worn eyes, expression unreadable. He waited for the next lift. The hum of the lobby filled the silence around him, the kind that eats through confidence over time. When the doors opened again, 2 interns stepped out mid-conversation. "Imagine driving for someone like her," one said. "You mean surviving her," the other replied, laughing. Daniel stepped inside, pressed the top floor button, and watched the numbers rise. He didn't hate her. Not exactly. What he felt was smaller, quieter, a recognition. He'd been here before, just on the other side of the glass. Once when people waited for him to speak, when rooms went silent until he gave the signal to begin. Now no one even noticed he existed. At the top floor, he waited outside the boardroom as the meeting began. Through the tinted glass, voices rose and fell, talks about markets, deadlines, the billion-dollar partnership that would determine the company's future. Someone inside laughed. Another offered congratulations. Then Evelyn's voice cut through. "Let's move on." "Driver, what's your name again?" "Daniel, right coffee. 2 sugars. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her assistant smirked, not out of cruelty, but habit, a reflex of hierarchy. Daniel walked to the break room, poured the coffee carefully. Every movement was deliberate, respectful. No one noticed that his tie was straight, his shoes polished, his posture, flawless habits left over from a man who once represented nations. As he set the cup beside her, she didn't look up. "Next time be quicker," she said. He turned away before his expression could betray anything. When the meeting ended, laughter followed her out the door. Daniel stood ready by the car umbrella, open now. She brushed past it again. "Don't hover, Daniel, it's unprofessional." He lowered the umbrella and watched her stride through the rain alone. A security guard beside him muttered, "She never changes." Daniel smiled faintly. Storms rarely do. He stepped back into the driver's seat, wiping the rain from his face. The radio murmured a traffic report. The words blurred into background noise. He had once sat across marble tables, convincing leaders not to start wars. Now he waited for a signal to start an engine. But somewhere beneath that calm silence, something waited. Not pride, not resentment. Something heavier, the quiet certainty that this would not last much longer. He glanced once more at the tower behind him, its lights flickering in the distance, and whispered almost to himself. Some things collapse from the inside first. The windshield wipers clicked once, twice. Then the phone rang, her voice again colder now. "Daniel, cancel tomorrow's route. The summit's moved to the Ridgeview Hotel. Be ready at 6. He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Did you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." The line cut. Outside, thunder rolled at last. People often talk about injustice as if it happens all at once, a moment, a word, a blow. But the real kind happens slowly, like a room forgetting you're still in it. If you've ever felt that way, unseen, unheard, you already know Daniel's world. And maybe that's why you'll understand what comes next. If you've ever carried silence longer than you should, you might stay with this story. And if you've found it speaks to something you've lived, you know where to share it. Others, reading the comments, might need to see they're not alone. If you find meaning in stories where people rediscover their worth, you can stay close to this channel. It's where voices like Daniel's are never lost again. The Ridgeview Hotel stood on the edge of the harbor, all glass and silence. Early morning rain left the air heavy with salt. Inside the lobby, executives moved like currents, confident, efficient, none of them noticing the man who carried their coats and kept his words to himself. Daniel waited near the car while Evelyn Cole spoke with her team. Her voice cut clean through the air, sharp, precise, always on the verge of impatience. If anyone brings up yesterday's numbers again, remind them what failure costs. He heard the line, filed it away with hundreds like it. The words of a woman fighting to control a storm she couldn't see. When they entered the elevator, Daniel stepped in last. The others filled the space with talk about profit margins and international contracts. No one spoke to him, though he stood not 2 feet away. At the top floor, Evelyn turned to her assistant. "Remind the delegation dinner is private. No substitutes, no photographers." Her assistant nodded, then glanced back at Daniel. "You can wait in the parking area, or the staff lounge if you prefer." Daniel gave a small nod. "Yes, sir." The assistant smirked. "It's ma'am, actually." He apologized quietly. No one responded. Downstairs, in the service corridor, Daniel sat near the vending machines. The hum of the building filled the space. Through the wall, he could hear faint echoes of laughter, the sound of people who would never know his name. A young bellboy stopped nearby, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You're with Ms. Cole, right?" "That's right. They say she's impossible. She's under pressure. Still, doesn't mean she has to treat everyone like furniture." Daniel smiled slightly. Sometimes people forget what still holds them up. The bellboy didn't understand, but he nodded politely and left. Hours passed. By noon, the lobby grew louder, arrivals from Tokyo, Singapore, Seoul. Cameras flashed. Translators shuffled papers. Evelyn's team looked nervous. The head interpreter had canceled at the last moment. She glanced at Daniel, not in acknowledgement, but irritation. "Stay near the car. If we need anything, we'll call." "Yes, ma'am." As she walked away, a man in a dark suit, one of the visiting delegates, stopped near Daniel, frowning at the directions sign. The man muttered in Japanese, frustrated. Daniel answered softly in the same language, explaining the route to the conference hall. The man smiled, bowed slightly. "Thank you." Daniel bowed in return. Evelyn's assistant, watching from across the lobby, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The meeting dragged into evening. Daniel remained by the car. Rain returned, tapping on the windshield like a steady clock. When the doors finally opened, Evelyn's voice carried out, brittle, strained. "They'll reconsider the terms tomorrow," she told her team, "assuming we can clarify the translation errors." Her assistant whispered something. Evelyn's expression hardened. "I don't care what it costs. Find someone fluent tonight." She dismissed them and turned toward the exit. For a moment, her reflection in the glass looked older than she wanted to admit. Daniel held the umbrella open as she approached. "You don't need to—" "It's raining," he said simply. She hesitated, then stepped under it. The first time that day, she didn't correct him. Inside the car, silence pressed between them. The city lights blurred across the wet windshield. Evelyn scrolled through her phone, jaw tight. 3 years building this partnership, she muttered. And now they think we're amateurs. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "It's difficult when meaning gets lost in translation," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "You'd know about that. I used to work with people who couldn't afford misunderstandings." He said nothing else. She studied him for a second longer, then returned to her phone. "Well, if you ever want to drive for someone less demanding, let me know. I'm fine where I am." She gave a short laugh, not cruel, just empty. "No one's fine here." The car stopped at the next red light. For the first time, Daniel looked at her reflection in the mirror, not with anger, but with quiet knowing. "You're right about that, Ms. Cole." The light turned green. They reached the hotel garage. Evelyn gathered her folders, stepped out, and turned back briefly. 6 tomorrow morning, and Daniel, thank you for the umbrella. Her voice was softer. He nodded once, unsure if he'd imagined it. When she disappeared inside, he sat there listening to the hum of the rain against the roof. Every injustice in his day had been quiet. No yelling, no insults, just the slow erasure of identity. But sometimes quiet is where everything starts to shift. He pulled a folded photo from his pocket. His wife and daughter on a summer afternoon, sunlight in their eyes. He slipped it back inside his wallet carefully, then started the car. Somewhere in the tower above, Evelyn Cole's voice echoed through a conference call demanding solutions that would not come. And below in the garage, the man she'd dismissed began to remember the weight of what he used to carry, and the calm he still knew how to use. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't ask for pity, it only asks to be seen. The next morning broke under a gray sky. Evelyn arrived at the lobby before sunrise, her coffee untouched, her steps sharp against the marble floor. Her team followed behind their faces, pale from another sleepless night. The Japanese delegation was already seated upstairs waiting. The interpreter she'd hired last night hadn't shown up. Find anyone fluent, she ordered. I don't care if you wake the embassy. The assistant ran off. Silence followed. Evelyn stood in front of the glass wall, staring at the rain sliding down its surface. Daniel waited near the car outside, raincoat on, expression calm. When the phone rang, he answered immediately. Yes, ma'am. Stay ready, she said. We may need to move soon. Understood. He hung up, but the line of her voice stayed with him. It wasn't arrogance now. It was something thinner, fear. Inside the conference hall, confusion grew. The visiting partners whispered among themselves. Documents in Japanese and Korean lay open across the table, full of crossed-out terms and mistranslations. They think we tried to mislead them, Evelyn muttered to her team. They're reading this as an insult. She tried calling her legal department. No answer. Her assistant whispered, if this falls apart, the investors will walk. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. It won't fall apart. But her hands were shaking. Outside, Daniel could hear the raised voices through the corridor vents. He didn't move. He simply listened. Years of negotiation had trained his ear tone before words silence, before collapse. Then came the sound he knew too well, the sharp scrape of a chair being pushed back in anger. He stepped inside quietly just as Evelyn's voice cracked across the room. Please, gentlemen, let's... The lead delegate, Mr. Tanaka, spoke sharply in Japanese, his tone final. The interpreter's absence had turned formality into offense. Evelyn's expression froze. Her assistant looked helpless. Daniel cleared his throat gently. Excuse me, Miss Cole. Every head turned. What languages do you need? Evelyn blinked. What? For this discussion, he said evenly. Which languages? Someone at the table murmured in Japanese, confused, irritated. Daniel responded fluently, his voice calm, respectful. The effect was immediate. The delegate stopped mid-sentence. For a full second, no one spoke. Then Daniel continued switching seamlessly into Korean to address the second representative, then into English to summarize the core issue. They're not rejecting the deal, he explained quietly. They're offended by the phrasing in Clause 14. It implies ownership, not partnership. Evelyn stared at him. You speak Japanese, among others. He turned back to the table, addressing the delegates again in their native tongues. His posture changed subtly. Shoulders, straight gaze, direct voice, firm but never forceful. The room began to settle. What had been chaos only minutes ago was now structure. What had been noise was now dialogue. When the discussion ended, the delegation's leader stood and bowed slightly to Daniel before leaving. Evelyn remained seated, speechless. Later in the hallway, she caught up to him. How did you... I was trained for situations like that, Daniel said simply. Trained in diplomacy, years ago. Her voice dropped. You're telling me my driver just saved $1 billion deal? He didn't answer. He only met her eyes, calm and steady. You hired someone who listens, Ms. Cole, that's all. For the first time, she couldn't find a reply. They rode the elevator in silence. The only sound was the faint hum of cables and the rain tapping against the glass. Evelyn's assistant finally spoke. We owe you, Mr. Reed. Daniel shook his head. No, you don't owe me anything. Just make sure they feel respected next time. When the doors opened, he stepped out first, holding the elevator door briefly as she followed. It wasn't deference now. It was courtesy. Equal, quiet, deliberate. Back at the car, Evelyn sank into the back seat, her phone ringing non-stop. She ignored it. Daniel, she said finally. Yes, ma'am. How many languages do you speak? 9. Her eyes widened. 9. Some better than others, but enough to understand people. She looked away out the window. The city blurred past gray towers, buses, people hurrying through rain. Why are you driving a car? She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Sometimes you do what you must to keep moving, he said. Titles don't pay the bills. She studied him through the glass partition. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something she couldn't name, a steadiness born from loss, maybe, or faith. You could have told me who you were, she said. You never asked. The car turned down an empty boulevard. The sound of the wipers filled the silence. For the first time, she realized she didn't actually know the man who had driven her every day for 3 years. That night, Daniel parked the car and sat for a long time before leaving. He wasn't thinking about the languages or the meeting or the shocked faces in that boardroom. He was thinking about how quickly respect can change hands and how easily it can vanish again. In his world, words had started wars and stopped them. Today they had saved a company, but tomorrow he would still be called driver. He looked up at the tower lights, then down at his own reflection in the windshield. Let's see how long it takes before they forget again, he murmured. Then he started the engine. Some people don't raise their voices to be heard. They wait for the world to quiet down enough to listen. Night closed over the city like a slow exhale. From her office window, Evelyn Cole watched the lights of the harbor flicker, each reflection stretching across the water, like threads she could no longer control. Her phone screen glowed with unanswered messages, investors demanding updates, reporters requesting statements. She muted all of them. Downstairs, the building was almost empty. Only the hum of cleaning carts echoed through the marble halls. Daniel waited outside, engine off, reading an old paperback whose pages had softened from use. When he saw her step out, he rose immediately and opened the door. She hesitated before getting in. Long day, she said quietly. It was he replied. The drive began in silence. Halfway down the bridge, she spoke again, her voice smaller than usual. Where did you learn all that? Which part? The languages, the negotiation, in places that don't show up on business maps. She gave a short laugh, half disbelief, half curiosity. You mean government work? Diplomatic work, he corrected gently. Before that, humanitarian mediation. Not every success made the news. The words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, she saw him not as an employee, but as someone who'd once sat across from people powerful enough to change nations and chose silence instead of boasting. So what happened? She asked. The budget ended. The work didn't. He said it without bitterness, just fact. And you ended up driving me. I ended up driving whoever needed to get somewhere. She studied his reflection in the window, his calm composure against the city lights. There was something deeply dignified in the way he accepted the present without erasing the past. When they reached her apartment building, she didn't get out immediately. Daniel, she said, you could have gone to anyone with your background. Why here? Because your company hired quickly. I didn't have time to wait. For what, my wife's hospital bills? The words were quiet, almost mechanical. He didn't look at her when he said them. She passed 3 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I. He gave a small nod as if ending the topic. But his hand lingered on the steering wheel a second longer than usual. Evelyn stepped out, but before closing the door, she said something that surprised them both. You shouldn't be invisible here, Daniel. He looked up, startled not by the words, but by the fact that she meant them. No one's invisible, he said finally. Some of us are just quieter than others. The car door closed softly. Later that night, Evelyn sat at her desk, surrounded by the ghosts of her ambition. Old awards press features the photo of her first office. She clicked open her laptop and typed Daniel Reed Diplomacy Career into the search bar. The results came instantly. Headlines from years ago: Envoy prevents cross-border conflict. Linguist leads. Historic agreement, State Department, honors, senior negotiator. And there, a grainy photo of Daniel shaking hands with global leaders, his expression, the same quiet calm she saw every morning in her rearview mirror. She closed the laptop and sat back. For the first time in months, she didn't feel powerful. She felt small, not because of him, but because of how little she had chosen to see. The next morning, Evelyn arrived early to the office. Daniel was already waiting, as always, car polished, punctual, silent. As they drove, she glanced at him through the mirror. I read about you. He didn't respond immediately. I wish you hadn't, he said finally. Why? Because it changes how people look at me. I'd rather earn respect for what I do now, not what I used to be. The humility in his tone unsettled her more than pride ever could. You don't miss it. Of course I do. But missing something isn't the same as living in it. Evelyn turned her gaze to the passing skyline. She thought about her company, the constant pressure, the people she overlooked, the quiet fatigue behind every forced smile. You know, she said softly, I built this business from nothing. Everyone said I'd fail. Maybe I'm still afraid they'll be right. That's why you lead with fear, he replied calmly. Excuse me, when fear drives people, stop following. They just survive beside you. The air between them tightened. She almost snapped back, but didn't. His voice hadn't been cruel, it had been true. That's easy to say from the passenger seat. No, he said quietly. It's easier to see from there. The rest of the drive passed in silence, but not the cold kind. The thoughtful kind, the silence after being told something you can't unhear. That afternoon, Evelyn called her assistant. Cancel the external translation team, she said. We'll handle internal communications differently from now on. Her assistant hesitated. Should I ask Mr. Reed to... No, Evelyn interrupted. Ask Mr. Reed if he'd join me in reviewing tomorrow's agenda. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Yes, Ms. Cole. In the meeting that followed, Daniel stood beside her instead of behind. When she introduced him to the board as our internal liaison. A few eyebrows rose, but no one dared to laugh. He spoke little, only when needed, translating complex exchanges into simple, clear terms. Every time he did, tension in the room eased not because of his words, but because of the way he listened before speaking. Afterward, Evelyn thanked him quietly. You made that look easy. Nothing about listening is easy, he said. People think silence is absence. It's actually concentration. She smiled faintly. I'll remember that. That night, he drove her home again. The air between them was no longer full of command and compliance. It carried a strange calm, almost mutual respect. Before she got out, she said, You once told me you listen because you have to. What about when no one listens back? He looked at her, his tone steady. Then I wait. Eventually someone does. Sometimes the people who stay quiet are not weak. They're waiting for a world loud enough to make silence valuable again. By the time morning arrived, the news had spread the foreign partners were reconsidering the merger. Rumors filled the top floor before Evelyn even walked in. Her executives were divided, their confidence fraying under the weight of uncertainty. Daniel followed behind her, carrying the presentation folder she'd asked him to review. It wasn't about coffee anymore. In the boardroom, the air was sharp with panic. Marcus Hale, the head of operations, spoke first, his tone hard. With all due respect, Evelyn, we can't risk this deal on improvisation. We need certified mediators, not staff experiments. Evelyn set her papers down. Mr. Reed isn't an experiment. The room went still. Daniel remained standing near the door, calm hands clasped. He saved the preliminary negotiations yesterday, she continued. Without him, there wouldn't even be a discussion today. Marcus scoffed. That's generous. He's your driver. The line hit the air like static. For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then her voice shifted, cold, clipped, deliberate. He's the reason the partners still trust us. If you can prove greater results in less time, you'll have the floor. No one moved. Daniel stepped forward slightly. If I may, Ms. Cole. She nodded. Mr. Hale, Daniel said evenly. You mentioned risk. Let's minimize it. I'll outline a structure that aligns with both parties' protocols. Japanese hierarchy, Indian efficiency, American transparency. The same balance used in previous intergovernmental agreements. Marcus frowned. And you think that'll solve everything? It'll solve what caused yesterday's breakdown, misunderstanding dressed as arrogance. The quiet authority in his tone stopped further argument. Even the ones who had smirked before were now taking notes. Evelyn looked around the table. Any objections? Silence. Then we proceed. Later, as the meeting disbanded, she caught Daniel by the hallway window. You didn't have to step in. You asked me to attend, not to lead. Then maybe you should decide which you want more results or comfort. She didn't answer right away. His words were firm but not disrespectful. They carried something she hadn't heard in years, honesty unfiltered by fear. You talk to me like no one else does, she said. Maybe because I don't need anything from you. She gave a small, tired smile. Everyone needs something. Not everyone. Some of us just want things done right. By afternoon, the international partners had arrived for a revised negotiation round. This time, the room felt different, smaller, quieter, balanced. Daniel coordinated the seating, ensuring respect between delegations. He spoke minimally, translating tone more than language. Where tension used to rise, it now dissolved. Where confusion threatened clarity, returned. At one point, when an Indian representative challenged a clause about intellectual property, Evelyn started to respond defensively. Daniel touched the folder lightly, signaling her to pause. Then he addressed the delegate in measured Hindi. The conversation softened. The man nodded. Evelyn didn't understand the words, but she saw the shift. After the meeting, she asked, "What did you say to him?" "That your company values partnership over ownership. But I didn't say that. Now you did." The next crisis arrived that evening. A leaked document online suggested that Cole and Partners was near bankruptcy, an exaggerated claim, but one that could destroy the merger overnight. Evelyn's voice shook as she slammed her office door. "Who's behind this?" "Competitors probably," her assistant said. "It's spreading fast." Daniel stood quietly by the window, watching the rain return. "Reacting will confirm it," he said. "Silence will bury it." She turned on him. "Easy for you to say. It's not your company on the line." "No," he said, calm. "But it's my integrity, and you hired me to protect both." She froze. The room felt suddenly smaller, the storm louder. "Then tell me what to do," she said finally. He stepped closer to the desk, voice steady. "Stay silent for now. When they ask tomorrow, show confidence, not denial. You can't outshout a rumor, you replace it with truth." She stared at him, the frustration in her expression fading into realization. "You really believe this will work?" "I believe people still recognize composure when they see it." That night, they worked side by side, rewriting the next morning's presentation. No titles, no commands. Just two people focused on saving what could still be saved. At one point, she asked, "You never get angry, do you?" He smiled faintly. "Often. I just learned to let the silence argue first." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "I wish I'd learned that sooner." "You still can." When dawn came, the sky was clear. The foreign partners returned for what would be the deciding session. Daniel guided the discussion like a conductor, never imposing, only adjusting tone, pace, intention. Evelyn followed his rhythm naturally, every word balanced between confidence and humility. After 3 tense hours, the lead delegate finally stood. "We accept the proposal." The room fell silent. Then applause, cautious at first, then full. Evelyn exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. She turned to Daniel. "You saved us again." "We saved it," he said simply. For a moment, her eyes softened, gratitude mixed with something deeper, almost respect. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I don't think I've ever said this before, but thank you. Then today's a good day to start." That night, she joined him for a simple dinner in the staff lounge. No boardroom, no hierarchy. Just two people who had finally learned to listen to each other. "I used to think control was strength," she admitted. "It's not, no, it's fear with better posture." He laughed quietly, surprised. "You're learning faster than most?" "That's what good teachers do." He shook his head. "I'm no teacher, Miss Cole." "Then what are you?" "Someone who remembers what people forget, that dignity doesn't vanish just because the world stops looking. Leadership doesn't always mean speaking louder than everyone else. Sometimes it means letting someone else finish their sentence and realizing they just saved your future." The applause from the final meeting hadn't even faded when the tension returned. News of the signed merger spread faster than the truth behind it. By noon, the board had called an emergency session. The conference room was full before Evelyn arrived. The executives' faces were drawn cautious. Marcus Hale sat at the head of the table, voice low but edged with challenge. "Congratulations on the deal, Evelyn," he began. "Now tell us how you managed it without the approved consultants." She placed the signed documents on the table. "We didn't need them, so you improvised again." His tone was dry. "You gambled $1 billion merger on an unverified source." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I relied on competence, which as it turns out isn't limited to titles." The room murmured. Marcus pressed on. "Let me guess you mean your driver." Every gaze turned toward Daniel standing near the back. Mr. Reed Marcus continued. "I'll assume you don't intend to build an international division from the driver's seat." Daniel's voice was calm. "I don't assume anything, sir. I prepare." Marcus's smile faltered. Meaning that if I ever have to represent this company again, it'll be because the people inside it know what they're representing." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Evelyn looked at her team. "He's right," she said. "You've seen his work. You've seen the result." "We've seen recklessness," Marcus shot back. "No," she said coldly. "You've seen accountability, something we've all been avoiding." Her tone was steady now, precise. The same woman who once used fear as control now wielded composure like armor. "If we value outcome," she continued, "then let's measure by results. Mr. Reed saved this company twice in 48 hours. I'm appointing him Director of Global Relations effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the room. Evelyn Marcus said, his voice sharp. "That's earned," she interrupted. "And final." She looked at Daniel. "You'll report directly to me." Daniel's expression barely changed, but there was a flicker of something, disbelief, maybe gratitude, maybe both. "Miss Cole," he said quietly, "you don't owe me this." "It's not a favor," she replied. "It's correction." After the meeting, as the others filed out in uneasy silence, Evelyn stayed behind. Daniel waited by the window, the city skyline glowing beyond the glass. "You know this won't be easy," he said. "It hasn't been easy for a long time. They'll question every decision you make. They already do." She turned to face him fully. "You once told me you listen because you've seen what happens when people don't. Tell me honestly, do you think I can fix this company?" He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Not if you try to fix it alone." "Then help me. Only if you're ready to hear the truth." She nodded once. "Say it. You built this empire by being right. Now you'll have to lead it by being human." The words landed heavier than any criticism she'd ever faced, not because they accused, but because they understood. She exhaled slowly. "That's harder than it sounds. Most worthwhile things are." Over the next week, Daniel began reshaping the company's communications quietly, without fanfare. He met with department heads not to command, but to listen. In rooms where arrogance had become routine, humility began to return uncomfortably at first, then naturally. Evelyn watched the shift unfold. She saw how people leaned in when Daniel spoke, how tension dropped the moment he entered a discussion, not because of power but because of presence. Late one evening, she found him still at his desk, surrounded by notes and cultural research reports. "You never stop," she said softly. "Neither do you." He looked up. "But the difference is you're finally building something that can last." "You think so? You're listening now." She smiled faintly. "That's simple. Simple doesn't mean easy." He closed his notebook. "You remind me of someone I used to work with. Another CEO. A minister once told me that power without empathy burns everything it touches. You're learning to keep the fire, not the smoke." She didn't reply, but her expression changed. Not pride, not defense, something like humility settling in. The next day, Daniel received a company badge with his new title printed on it. He turned it over once before pinning it to his jacket. The security guard at the entrance, the same one who'd once waved him past without a word, stopped him now. "Morning, Mr. Reed." Daniel nodded. "Morning." As he stepped into the elevator, he noticed his reflection again, the same man, same calm, but finally visible. That evening, Evelyn called him into her office. The city lights outside had softened to amber. "You changed how people see this place," she said. "No," he corrected gently. "They changed when you did." She paused, looking out the window. "Maybe you're right. Maybe, let's say I'm still learning." He smiled slightly. "Then you're further ahead than most." She turned back to him. "Daniel, you ever regret stepping down from diplomacy?" "Sometimes. But I don't regret ending up here, even after how I treated you, especially because of it." Her voice softened. "You're too forgiving." "No," he said quietly. "I just know what it's like to be broken and rebuild anyway." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, true, unpolished. 6 months later, the skyline outside Cole and Partners looked different. Not because the buildings had changed, but because the people inside them had. The merger had stabilized. New offices had opened overseas, and every floor carried an unfamiliar sound laughter. Daniel arrived early, as always. His corner office wasn't large, but it was full of life notes in several languages, small gifts from international partners, a single-framed photo of his daughter in her graduation robe. He was reviewing reports when his assistant knocked. "Ms. Cole's looking for you, sir. They're waiting upstairs. I'll be right there." He took one last glance around the room before leaving his old driver's badge still hanging near the desk next to a company pin engraved with his new title, Executive Vice President Global Relations. The boardroom was already full when he arrived. Evelyn stood at the front, confident but calm. The tension that used to define her presence was gone. "Morning, Daniel," she said. "Morning, Ms. Cole." She gestured to the screen. "We're finalizing the internal launch of our Cultural Intelligence Division today. I want you to lead the introduction." He hesitated. "I'm not a speaker." "You're exactly what people will listen to," she said simply. He looked around executives, interns, old skeptics who now nodded when he entered the room. Then he began. 6 months ago, this company almost collapsed because we stopped hearing each other. We measured performance, not people. We valued noise over understanding. And yet, when everything nearly fell apart, silence, the right kind of silence, saved us. He let the room breathe. "What I learned from this team and from Ms. Cole is that talent doesn't always stand in the spotlight. Sometimes it's driving you to work. Sometimes it's waiting for someone to ask what it knows. This division isn't just about global strategy. It's about seeing what's already here." Applause came slowly at first, then built into something steady, genuine. Evelyn's expression softened. For once, she didn't try to lead the moment. She let it happen. That evening, as the office emptied, Evelyn stopped by Daniel's door. He was watching the harbor lights again, just as he had months ago when everything felt uncertain. "You handled that perfectly," she said. "Habit," he replied. "I used to translate between people who didn't trust each other. Turns out business isn't that different." She smiled. "There's one thing you didn't translate today." "What's that gratitude?" "Mine." He turned a little caught off guard. "You already said thank you. Not for the deal. For reminding me who I wanted to be when I started this." He studied her expression, not the polished confidence of a CEO, but the honesty of someone who'd been changed and wasn't afraid to show it. "You did that yourself," he said. "Maybe, but I needed someone to show me how." She held out a small box. Inside was a key engraved with his initials. "What's this?" "The car," she said. "You never officially returned it." He smiled faintly. "I think I'm done driving." "Then keep it," she said. A reminder that titles aren't destinations. Later that night, Daniel called his daughter. Her voice was full of excitement. She'd been offered a research fellowship abroad. "Dad," she said, "I can't believe this is happening." "You earned it," he replied. "I couldn't have without you." He didn't tell her about the title or the office or the applause. He just said, "I'm proud of you." When the call ended, he sat in silence watching the city lights ripple against the dark water. On his desk sat 2 objects. His old driver's license worn around the edges, and next to it an antique silver business card case, a gift from one of the Japanese partners, a symbol of respect he still couldn't quite believe he'd earned. He opened it once briefly, then closed it again. "Full circle," he murmured. A week later, the company hosted a small celebration to mark the merger's global rollout. Executives from every region attended, and among them were dozens of employees promoted from overlooked positions. Analysts, translators, assistants, people who had once been as invisible as he had. Evelyn spoke first. "We used to think leadership meant perfection," she said. "Now we know it means awareness. And sometimes awareness starts in the back seat of a car." Laughter rippled softly through the crowd. Then she gestured toward Daniel, "The man who reminded us what listening looks like." He stepped forward to modest applause, smiling awkwardly. "This isn't my story alone," he said. "It's ours. We just decided to look closer." Later that night, as the event ended, Evelyn walked with him to the rooftop terrace. The city stretched below them, lights flickering across glass and water. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" she asked. "No," he said. "I carry it with me." She nodded, understanding. "Daniel, if you ever decide to leave, I'd like to think you'll always come back. Why?" "Because every place needs someone who reminds it to listen." He smiled. "Then I'll leave quietly and come back the same way." They stood in silence for a while, neither rushing to fill it. The world below moved on, cars, people, voices. But up here, everything felt still. Some victories don't arrive with noise. They arrive with understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. If you've ever been overlooked and kept going anyway, you already know what this story means. And if it spoke to you, your own story, your own quiet persistence sharing it, might remind someone that patience isn't weakness. And if you believe that dignity, empathy, and second chances can rebuild anything, you can stay with this space. It's where stories like this one are kept alive, one voice at a time. Daniel Reed left the rooftop that night with no speech, no applause, no spotlight. Just calm. The kind that comes when a man stops needing to prove who he is because finally everyone sees it.